Good morning. Welcome to the webinar for the Advanced Reactor Strategy Report. I'm Dean Scott, Senior Environment and Energy Reporter for B-Law as part of the Bloomberg family. I note this webinar is being recorded for all of you. I'm going to go over some brief biographical information for some of the participants this morning. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's a great turnout today. I'm looking forward to a really engaged discussion. First, we'll have Judi Greenwald. Judi is Executive Director of the Nuclear Innovation Alliance. NIA is a think and do tank focused on commercializing advanced reactors as a climate solution. They provide analysis and recommendations in support of regulatory, legislative, industry, and civil society activities. Ms. Greenwald has over 35 years of energy and environmental policy leadership experience in the public and nonprofit sectors, including the U.S. Congress, White House, EPA, Department of Energy, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES, which was formerly the Pew Center on Global Climate Change. She is a fellow at Princeton University's Andelinger Center for Energy and Environment. Ken Luongo is the founder and president of the Partnership for Global Security, creator of Global Nexus initiatives. The Partnership for Global Security focuses work on the policy nexus of climate change, nuclear power, and global security. Ken is a recognized innovator, entrepreneur, and leader in global nuclear and transnational security policy. He served as a senior advisor to the Secretary of Energy for Non-Proliferation Policy and simultaneously at the Department of Energy as the director of the Office of Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, director of the Russia and newly independent states Nuclear Material Security Task Force, and director of the North Korea Task Force. He's authored nearly 100 articles, been a TEDx presenter, engaged extensively with global media, and briefed governments and audiences around the world on nuclear and transnational security challenges and responses. We'll also be joined by three respondents who are going to comment on the report from ClearPath, Good Energy Collective, and the Atlantic Council a little later in the program. We're going to open up the conversation to questions a little later after we have a brief conversation with Judi and Ken. I'm going to hand this off to Judi and Ken to introduce some of the findings of the report and discuss some of the highlights and sort of the purposes for why we're talking about an advanced nuclear strategy now. I'm going to hand it off to you, Judi. Would you like to start?
Thanks so much, Dean, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I just started as Executive Director of the Nuclear Innovation Alliance last fall, and I'm really happy to be working with our partners and the broader advanced reactor community on this promising technology. I believe it's essential to pursue a portfolio of options to give us the best chance of success at combating climate change. We developed this strategy to synthesize insights and aspirations from across the advanced reactor community, including from many of you in the audience. We did this together with PGS to combine their international focus with our domestic one. The strategy highlights the important role that advanced nuclear energy can play in achieving domestic and global energy goals, particularly for decarbonization. We believe we need to launch a whole of society effort. That means industry, government, labor, environmentalists, local community leaders, private investors, and others working together. We need to ensure societal benefits with advanced nuclear energy that's affordable, clean, reliable, and just. I'm going to focus on our domestic recommendations and let Ken focus on the international ones. We recommend incorporating advanced nuclear energy into a broader U.S. climate, innovation, and infrastructure agenda. This requires actions at all levels of government to create jobs, foster economic growth, promote community development, and modernize our energy system. And it requires continuing and, in fact, growing bipartisan support for allowing all promising low-carbon technologies to be part of the solution. The administration has a major role to play through successful implementation of the U.S. Department of Energy innovation programs, especially through public-private partnerships. And Congress has a major role to play in ensuring adequate funding. The Independent Nuclear Regulatory Commission must continue its essential role in ensuring safety, It needs to do so effectively and efficiently in a way that accounts for the characteristics of the new suite of advanced reactor technologies. Industry is leading on innovation and will need to demonstrate it can deliver cost-competitive commercial designs. As we pursue advanced reactor development, we need to prioritize community engagement and environmental justice, and we won't be successful unless we do. We hope this report will spur conversation among all the relevant voices to begin making a whole of society effort possible. The largest near-term priority is for the industry to license, develop, and build demonstration projects. And we need sufficient appropriations from Congress, and we also need private investment. Time is of the essence due to the timeframes for developing, designing, licensing, construction, and cost innovation through learning by doing. And that means that we have to start now. So I'll turn to Ken and see if he wants to talk about the international part.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks, Dean. It's been my great pleasure to be able to collaborate with NIA on this report, and also with the other parties that have endorsed it and that are represented today on today's webinar. What I want to do is focus on 5 key interrelated international global security issues that are highlighted in the report. First, there's a pressing need to reestablish the role of the United States as a leader in nuclear exports. The US can't compete on advanced nuclear products and achieve its goal if it doesn't have a product that the market wants and that it can develop in a reasonable time frame. Without a viable reactor, it will be difficult for the US to ensure the strong non-proliferation and nuclear security standards, which are going to be necessary for the eventual deployment and expansion of advanced nuclear around the world. 2, the next generation of nuclear non-proliferation security guidance needs to be developed, and the United States needs to be a central player in that process. The smaller size, the novel coolants and fuel cycles associated with these reactors are going to need adjustment in the international security and safeguard system, just because those standards were primarily written for large reactors. So historically, those that are most active, those nations which are most active in the nuclear export business and in the market, have had an outsized influence over those standards. So for the United States to continue to support and advance its strong support for non-proliferation and nuclear security, it needs to be a player in the export market. Third, nuclear geopolitics are an important economic, diplomatic, and global security concern. Russia and China are going to be major competitors for the United States and its allies in this reactor space. They will not be waiting for the United States to play catch up. They are already out there engaged with a number of countries, especially in the developing economy world, on the export market and for their technologies and for their energy products, especially in China through Belt and Road, and then Russia through more general energy and geopolitical strategy. So from my perspective, and I think it's clear in this report, the stakes are not just economic. In other words, the export issue is not just an economic issue, but it's a geopolitical influence and a non-proliferation and security issue as well. 4, financing is an essential issue to achieve US global security and export leadership objectives. The Russian and Chinese nuclear companies are state-owned enterprises, and it's clear that they have an inherent advantage over the United States and allied companies that primarily are private sector. A private sector-centric approach is unlikely to work in the current environment, in the current market environment. There needs to be a partnership between the private sector and governments, and you need to ensure that there's a steady flow of capital for this process. There also needs to be a partnership between the United States and its allies, because not all of the supply chain resides within the United States. They should also consider collaborating on export financing. And finally, number 5, nuclear must be part of clean energy diplomacy. It's not been a top priority in the international climate change strategy up to this point, despite the fact that in the United States, it is over 50% of the clean energy clean electricity production in the United States, and that's also true for other countries like in South Korea. It has been included in the clean energy ministerial process, but nuclear has really not been a piece of the top level discussion under the UN COP process, Conference of the Parties, Paris Agreement. And it's also fighting for a space inside the EU. So there needs to be a change at the upcoming Glasgow meeting on the UN Framework Agreement. And I think that the Biden administration has made clear that they view nuclear as part of the clean energy suite of technologies. And I'm hopeful that they'll be active in promoting it in Glasgow as well as domestically. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask each of you a question sort of to frame this for where we are in the climate discussion intersection with advanced nuclear, which is, why should the Biden administration include advanced nuclear as part of its climate strategy, particularly in its ambitious goal to get us to net zero emissions by 2050? Ken, if you'd like to go first, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you look at the documents from the campaign phase of the last year, it's clear that nuclear is a component of their strategy. Also, if you look at, you know, the challenging political environment inside the United States, advanced nuclear has been one of the few issues on which there's been bipartisan support. So I think that we have a foundation for how this process can advance. I think there's a clear space domestically and internationally for this technology. But this administration is really going to have to put their foot on the gas and move it forward. And, you know, the challenge, I think, is that the United States doesn't have a great track record of moving important energy technologies beyond the R&D phase. And I don't think we can let that happen. The challenge from China and the challenge from Russia is serious. And if you listen to what the president had to say about his call with President Xi, you know, they're going to eat our lunch. Well, we can't allow them to eat our lunch on this issue. This is an important energy issue, and clean energy is essential for the globe. So I think that as a matter of prioritization, this administration really needs to press forward. And we can't allow what's happened in the past to happen again. And that is, we spend billions of dollars through the R&D phase, and then we abandon the project.
Judi, what's your thought? What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, the administration should include advanced nuclear energy because it will make it more likely that we'll succeed in combating climate change. And the climate is just too important to bet it on too narrow a set of technologies. And the good news is that the administration, as Ken said, seems to understand that. The administration is approaching the climate problem with ambition and urgency, and is taking a technology inclusive approach that includes advanced nuclear energy and lots of other important and promising technologies. And what we hope is that the strategy that we're releasing today will help them to flesh out this component of their agenda. The other thing they seem to understand, and this is what I think Build Back Better could mean, is that we have to take a whole of society approach. Just as we have to in advanced nuclear, we have to do that for climate more broadly. Solving climate change isn't something that the federal government can do by itself, although federal policy is super important. But the administration needs to lead a national mobilization in which we all have roles to play. And that's what it seems to be, to me, it seems to be that that's where they're headed, and we'd really be happy to help.
Thank you, Judi. I'd like to introduce three other respondents, sort of experts in this area, and give them an opportunity to react to the report, and also highlight some key takeaways. And I'd also like to take a moment to suggest those who are watching today, send us some good questions. We've got some good people on this thing, and I really like this topic, particularly this intersection between the kinds of technologies that we're going to need if the U.S. and, for that matter, the world is going to move toward reducing our emissions to the amount required by science by 2050. First, we have Niko McMurray, Nuclear Program Director at ClearPath. Niko develops and advances ClearPath's policies on nuclear energy as part of the organization's broader focus on clean energy innovation. Prior to joining ClearPath, Niko was a materials engineer at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. ClearPath's mission is to develop and advance policies that accelerate breakthrough innovations that reduce emissions in the energy and industrial sectors. Jessica Levering is co-founder and co-executive director of Good Energy Collective. She's worked in advanced nuclear policy for 8 years, recently completed her PhD in engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University. Good Energy Collective is a policy research organization building a progressive case for nuclear energy as an essential part of the broader climate change agenda. And then we'll have Dr. Jennifer Gordon. Jennifer is the managing editor and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, where she runs the nuclear energy policy portfolio and focuses on the geopolitics of nuclear energy and international civil nuclear cooperation. The Atlantic Council is a nonpartisan organization, promotes U.S. leadership and engagement in the world by partnering with allies to shape solutions to global challenges. Take it away, Niko.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you to the Partnership for Global Security and the Nuclear Innovation Alliance for the invitation today. I'm really excited to participate as the Advanced Reactor Strategy Report is an impressive outcome to PGS's and NIA's outreach efforts. It was really difficult to decide on what to talk about in my introductory remarks. Judi and Ken did a great job highlighting the report, so I'll be brief as I look forward to the open discussion and Q&A after. The strategy report presents a holistic approach to the advanced nuclear energy industry. It is very comprehensive and looks at what it would take across the entire nuclear industry to make nuclear successful. The report builds off the momentum from last Congress, which started several significant programs. Now the challenge is we have to make them successful. I'm optimistic the new Congress, new administration, and new leadership at the Department of Energy will continue to support these programs and the nuclear industry. This report presents a framework for success. I want to focus on 2 quick points. First of all, I highly recommend everyone on this webinar to read and digest the report. Due to the fact that it's so broad, there are going to be areas that different organizations, many of which are on this webinar, will resonate with more. Second, I want to emphasize that this report is more than just an academic exercise. Here's a few examples where NIA has previously provided significant value to ClearPath and others based on their in-depth technical reports. These can provide the basis for collaboration or legislation. First report I want to highlight is NIA published a report on enabling allied financing, which is especially important to counter the state-owned enterprises that Ken mentioned in his remarks. They also released a report on streamlining the DOE's, Department of Energy's, Part 810 export process to tap into the global market and support international decarbonization. These are both topics in proposed pieces of legislation, such as the Senate's bipartisan American Nuclear Infrastructure Act. Another great report was on the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. We know we need to build as much and as quickly all the new clean energy resources, including nuclear. And recently we've seen that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff proposed a rulemaking that would incorporate some of these ideas into their environmental reviews, as well as there have also been recent pieces of legislation that include some of these ideas. This is another example where NIA has developed the technical basis for changes, and organizations like mine can advocate for these changes that can accelerate clean energy deployment. Finally, the report I want to highlight from the NIA was on the SpaceX for nuclear. This report looked at applying the NASA COTS program to nuclear, and the report is now extremely relevant again. The Historic Energy Act of 2020 not only authorized the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, but also DOE-wide the ability to implement a milestone-based development program. While this is authorized, DOE now needs to develop the guidance to carry out these programs successfully. If DOE is successful in this, it will better allow our innovators and entrepreneurs to partner with the DOE. It'll give them the opportunity to develop their designs, meet specific technical and hardware milestones, and de-risk the US taxpayer unless a project shows promise and success. These are all historical reports. Again, they've been either incorporated into pieces of legislation or ongoing rulemakings, or proposed rulemakings, I guess I should say, at the NRC, or have been picked up by industry and other organizations to champion for. I'm also aware of some of NIA's upcoming projects, which align with the strategy report, which will be really useful to prioritize NIA's work, but also other organizations to leverage the report. The international piece is also equally important. with the market that's available out there, as well as for the competition aspects, that we have to be a leader, not just domestically, but also internationally. I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with NIA and PGS and others on this call to craft these solutions. So thank you for the invitation. And I look forward to our Q&A and open discussion later. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Jessica Lovering, the co-founder of the Good Energy Collective.
Thanks, Niko. I'm going to keep my comments short so we have lots of time for questions, because I'm already seeing some good questions in there. But just wanted to echo what Niko said. I'm really excited to see this report come out, because I think, you know, at Good Energy Collective, we've been very excited about what Biden administration, or what the campaign and now the administration has said about climate, and also what they've said about nuclear in some of their documents and early in the campaign. So we think this is a really critical time, particularly the next 2 years, while we know the Democrats have control of the Senate just barely. It's kind of the time to get big action done. And I think something that's critical that comes across in this strategy that we also think is really important is how to integrate nuclear into a broader climate agenda. As Niko said, there's been some really great nuclear legislation in the last few years, but to really move the needle, to get big movement on deploying advanced nuclear on demonstration, it's going to need to be a big package, big legislation with lots of funding, and that's probably going to be more likely to happen in a broader climate change package or legislation. There's been a really good report that just came out from Evergreen Action on clean energy standards. And I think that's something that we need to keep our eye on, because they're open to nuclear, but it's not very stressed in the report. There's more talk about existing nuclear and how important that is, but going forward, they're looking at big expansion of clean energy, and you know, they don't really have a plan for how nuclear is incorporated into that, although I definitely think a clean energy standard could be very beneficial to new nuclear. So that's just something to keep on our radar. I think, you know, it's been great working with NIA. I've worked with PGS in the past on different projects in other capacities, and working with ClearPath at Good Energy Collective. So I think we've got a good group here to collaborate on fleshing out this agenda and getting good things done in the next 2 years.
Thank you so much, Niko and Jessica, and thank you also to the Partnership for Global Security and for the Nuclear Innovation Alliance for inviting me to speak and to participate with such an incredible group. And congratulations also on the release of this extremely important report. I want to, as the last person to speak amongst the speakers, I want to just kind of highlight quickly some of my takeaways from the report, but also from what each of you have said, and then very quickly wrap it up and turn it over to the Q&A. So first of all, Ken, I just thought that that was such an excellent explanation of what the stakes really are in this debate, and why we should all pay attention and care about the United States having a strong civil nuclear export program. Judi, also just an outstanding overview of what this new administration can do and how to address, you know, the changes that we can make in working, you know, from our roles in civil society and with NGOs to kind of to inform what the policies will look like in the next few years. And Niko, as always, it's great to listen to you talk about the regulatory environment and NRC rulemaking. And Jessica, I absolutely agree with your analysis that nuclear energy truly has a key role to play in a broader climate policy. So with that said, I do want to circle back, you know, from the Atlantic Council standpoint and the work that we do, I want to circle back to Ken's point about geopolitical competition and also geopolitical cooperation, and say that one of the key, or a few of the key takeaways really for me in this report is the United States has a nuclear energy industry, and we are competing against state-owned enterprises, especially in Russia and China. And so we understand that we are not going to nationalize our own nuclear energy industry, but I do believe that there is so much that we can do up until that point where we can truly empower nuclear energy and again, a strong civil nuclear export program to really make a difference and to be a counterweight, especially if we work with our allies, to be a counterweight to what Russia and China are doing. And so to pick up on a few specific things from the report, the 10 CFR Part 810 regulations and modernizing on that issue, proactively and preemptively negotiating Section 123 agreements with new to nuclear countries, and lifting the Atomic Energy Act's FOCD provision where appropriate, and certainly for U.S. allies. And just again, minimizing trade barriers. And these are all things that are in the report, but minimizing trade barriers and looking to our allies, especially to see how can we cooperate, how can we provide that counterweight, especially when it comes to financing, so that we can, again, become more than just the sum of our parts. So thank you again, and back to you, Dean.
Thank you, Jennifer. I would like to throw out a reminder, I guess, to folks that are participating. Go ahead and send in questions. We've gotten some pretty good ones already. Also, if you haven't seen the report, I invite you to go on nuclearinnovationalliance.org. The report is posted there now. So if you want to look at it maybe later after the discussion, or look at it while we're talking. What my first question is from a participant, and Judi, I'd ask you to comment on this first, if possible. Inclusion of nuclear into the clean energy framework heavily depends on the cost. Are there any ideas on how to encourage support, development, and commercialization of cost-effective nuclear power technologies? And then any of you, Niko, Jessica, and Jennifer, if you want to jump in after Judi, that would be great too. Judi?
Yeah, so we need a big R&D effort, and we also need a demonstration effort, and we also need a commercialization effort. And sometimes we think of that completely linearly, like first you do R&D, then you do demonstration, then you do deployment, and there's certainly some of that. But it also is a bit of a reinforcing circle that as we actually deploy technology, we learn, and then we actually can get better. So the process of bringing costs down is about doing the research and development, and also the demonstrations, and also the deployment. And we definitely need a strong role for government, but we also really need a strong role for the private sector. And it is really up to the private sector to make sure that we have a technology that's competitive and cost effective. But it's also really up to the government to make sure we have a robust R&D program, which goes after R&D that private sector can't justify on its own, and also a partnership in the demonstration phase between the public and the private actors. And then on deployment, there's a lot of role for industry, but there's also a lot of role for deployment policies, such as what Jessica mentioned in terms of a clean electricity standard or many other options, which would pull all clean technologies, including successful advanced nuclear, to the extent that we can make it successful, into the economy and help us solve climate and other important energy problems.
Niko, Jennifer, Jessica, any of you like to join in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Okay. Add a little nuance to what Judi said. I think increasing R&D is really important, but also making sure that R&D is really targeted towards bringing costs down. And so, we've seen really good programs like DOE's Sunshot program, which had a specific cost target for solar panel, and they funded a lot of different projects to get there. Something that Biden mentioned in his campaign is developing an ARPA for climate, an ARPA-C. And one of the examples they gave of what it could fund would be a program that was aimed at bringing the cost of SMRs down by 50%. So that's one of those targets that we'd love to see, and actually funding to support that. And then on the demand pull side, I think that's maybe even more important. I think that's something that's really been lacking for nuclear. On the policy side, we've seen all sorts of different mechanisms for demand pull for renewables, which have really helped to spur the industry, and that brings costs down when you're building on a larger scale. So it could be a clean energy standard, which increases demand for all sorts of clean energy, but it could be nuclear specific, like a program to build SMRs or microreactors at federal facilities. Something like that could help spur the first demand for the first, several units to get going down that cost curve.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in there?
Yeah, I would just very quickly say, what's the cost of business as usual? And the cost of continuing down this path, especially with fossil fuels. So, yeah, I think, sure, there may be a cost, especially in the R&D and kind of getting things spun up, but, isn't that worth it if it's a way of mitigating human impacts on climate change?
I also I wonder if we've got a couple questions on the international sort of front. So I think this is a good segue into sort of the different kinds of international agreement and international funding that might be brought to bear on this, because as we know, this is an area where according to the report, if the U.S. is going to be sort of a lead developer in the technology, which in some cases it is, international cooperation would help put this out there as a global solution, which is necessary for climate change. So we have a couple questions. One is from reporter Dan Yerman. I'm going to combine these two. Ken, if you want to take the first shot at this, should the U.S. cooperate with Western nations to create an international development bank? So now that we're getting at financing for nuclear energy, this institutional arrangement could be an effective competitor to favorable financial terms offered by Russian and Chinese state-owned enterprises, and if it's feasible. And then we have another question: is there an opportunity for allied countries to work together to drive the results we hope for? And here we're talking about any number of countries: Japan, UK, US, Canada, etc., but even countries in the rapidly developing world, such as India. So that sort of international financing and cooperation, what's the role there, Ken?
Let me take the second part first on cooperation with allies. There's, besides the United States, it's clear that the United Kingdom and Canada have a very clear interest in this advanced nuclear business. South Korea and Japan also have an incredible technological capability in this area, but they're hindered at the moment by the politics of Fukushima. I think that, again, what you really need to be doing is what Judi and others have done, and that is back out from the technology into the larger framework. What are we trying to do? We're trying to decarbonize this global energy system so that we don't have to deal with the implications of climate change. So this is not the only technology, but it is definitely one in a suite of important technologies that can be applied. So one thing to think about is, if Biden goes forward with this summit of democracies, which is supposed to have, has its roots in the nuclear security summit process of Obama from 2010 to 2016. And I'm certain that there will be an energy component of that. This nuclear issue should be part of that clean energy discussion among allies. I think it's important that allies work together. We've been locked, as some may know, in a kind of civil nuclear freeze out with the South Koreans over big reactors, but we can't, and it's impacted R&D, it's impacted the overall energy relationship. That kind of stuff can't interfere with this much larger global imperative, which is to try and decarbonize the global energy system. And if you look, the last 2 days, I've seen really long interview with Bill Gates in the Wall Street Journal, and then another shorter version with Politico. He is to the point that Jessica and others are making. This R&D issue is hugely important, and the amount of money that we're spending on it doesn't, in his view, need to be trillions, but it does need to be about 4 times bigger than what we're currently spending. So I think that kind of R&D among allies is important. Second, we have to be able to overcome this competition among our friends. I mean, from my perspective, I just don't think it's going to work. If the United States is fighting against South Korea and we're fighting against, Japan, or competing heavily with the Canadians or the UK, I just don't think that's going to work. I mean, the state-owned enterprise is not some kind of, concept. It's a real thing where the government puts their money behind this geopolitical imperative. And that is extremely difficult to compete with because it's tied to the objective, the international objectives of the individual country. To the second part of that, which is the financing, I think Jennifer published something about 6 or 8 months ago, which is really interesting on this question. I'm not expert enough in how the export finance business works, but I certainly think we need a pool of money to Dan's question, some kind of bank. I don't know what the charter of that would be, but some pool of international money among the democratic countries is necessary because, you know, besides the climate issue, the standards and the non-proliferation and security of these reactors going forward is an absolutely essential issue, and we do not want to race to the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Niko, would you like to jump in there? Do you have anything to add? If not, we can go on to the next question. I wanted to throw out a question. Pull a couple threads together from some technical questions that folks are asking. I thought it'd be a good opportunity maybe to pull back for a moment and just talk about what we mean when we're talking about advanced energy technologies. There's some questions about the general lack of support and perhaps even understanding of molten salt fast reactors, and sort of, which I think goes to the heart of the public's imagination and understanding of what the rationale is for advanced nuclear when we pull away from sort of the traditional larger reactor sets. Without getting into specific projects, can one of you lay out, I'll just let someone volunteer for this one, sort of some examples of these technologies and why they offer advantages over sort of the traditional nuclear power structure that we have today?
I'll jump in.
There you go.
Sure. I think there's definitely been a lot of support for a lot of these different technologies. I mean, most recently with the Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, supporting everywhere from your single megawatt electric microreactors all the way to all different kinds of coolants, advanced reactors, whether it's salts, liquid sodium, or gas. So there has really been a support from the Department of Energy to try to look at the variety of these technologies and see what makes sense to be the most cost competitive, as well as what different attributes they have to not just decarbonize electricity, but some of these advanced reactors at their higher temperatures can be really important for decarbonizing industry, either through directly using their process heat or producing hydrogen that can then be made into something that could be used elsewhere. So I think it's really looking at kind of the broader suite of recognizing we have a lot of different technologies, a lot of them have different advantages. How do we figure out which reactor types and designs can be that most cost competitive? But if we look even internationally, we see there is still an interest all the way from single digit microreactors all the way through 1,000 megawatt large light water reactors. So it's important for the US to have that capability to be competitive, not just domestically, but internationally with these different technology options. And that goes even that next step of what's the regulatory requirements to make sure they can review it and support all of these different designs that look different. They rely on safety different. They have different systems. So it's taking that holistic view, and that's where I think the report does a great job. Is it's not picking one technology or two technologies. It's saying we need a nuclear industry. What is it going to take us to get there here in the US, as well as be a competitor and have a product or products to sell internationally?
As a follow-up there, I wonder, Judi, if you could touch on why, you know, we're in this space coming out of a Senate energy package. I thought someone brought this up earlier, but thematically at least, we're in a situation where it's very hard to get bipartisan support for climate solutions these days. And at least, you know, for a lot of us who cover climate change, it seemed like there were some significant advances for advanced energy and other technological, you know, solutions in that package. I wonder if you might just take a moment to talk to us about how that kind of consensus, does that bode well going forward for this and other technology solutions when we have, even with a democratically controlled Senate, we still are going to need a lot of back and forth between both parties to find common ground. Could you talk a little bit about that, Judi?
Yeah, I mean, the recent history of innovation legislation in general, and particularly for advanced nuclear, is actually very, upbeat. It's, sometimes we're all looking desperately for good news, and I think that is good news. I think there's a broad support, bipartisan support for innovation broadly and for advanced nuclear in particular, and I think that's a great set of pieces of legislation and activities in the administration to build on. So I actually think that this is a bright spot in our potential progress going into the future. And I think that there is, it just tells us that it is possible to make genuine progress, and that, makes me excited to be working in this space. I did see earlier, I thought Jessica raised her hand. Did she want to chime in on the?
Yeah, please,
No?
Jessica.
Yeah, okay.
You have your hand up. Okay. Well, I'm going to pose this question to Jessica and Jennifer Gordon anyway. So I wanted to talk about, there have been a couple questions about cost curves in terms of like us getting to a place where we can spread this technology overseas. And there's also some questions about waste. And obviously we talk about nuclear energy. Everyone is aware of the challenges for waste. So I wondered, I guess I'll take those as two sides of the coin, which is how does the U.S. help lead in an arena where it has to help drive down the cost curve, but also with an eye toward making sure that we're managing concerns about waste, and also our partners overseas. We want to make sure that's what's one of these questions is getting to, is making sure that we're working with other countries to ensure that we're helping them provide the safest technology possible as it comes online around the world. Jennifer, would you like to take it first?
Sure, I'll take the first part of this on the cost curves, and also on cooperating, I think, more effectively again with our allies, and to pick up on what Judi was saying about some of the progress that we've seen in the last few years. Something that hasn't come up yet in this conversation is both the reauthorization of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, and also the lifting last summer of the United States Development Finance Corporation's, the DFC's, restriction on nuclear energy finance projects. So I think that these are both two really great steps in the right direction. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of these types of papers over the last several years have called for over and over again. And so it was really encouraging to see both, to see these two developments. And so I think that that's something that we can use, we can take that momentum. And by the way, both of those steps are what will allow the United States to then enter into these partnerships on co-financing with, for example, JBIC, or other countries' EXIM, equivalents. So we can do that and then make more competitive financing offers to third-party countries. So the countries that are interested in acquiring either entirely new nuclear technologies, they haven't had nuclear before, or they're interested in perhaps acquiring different types of nuclear technologies than they previously had. So anyways, this is something that I really hope to see continue.
Jessica, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think just on the cost curve side, we've talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to keep hammering on it, but there's several different components of bringing costs down. There's demand, as we mentioned, there's R&D, and there's also a lot of policy. And different policies are needed at different stages, whether it's demonstration or it's diffusion. And so, we keep talking about this whole of government approach, but it really is important to coordinate across agencies and also federal and state level to have more of a holistic approach to deployment and bringing the cost down. On the international side, I think, something that's a useful framing is to remember that, the US, and not just the US, but a lot of European countries are not so great at doing big infrastructure projects. It's really challenging to manage such a big project. And that's really what's plagued nuclear in the recent past, particularly in the West. But we, particularly the US, is very good at building factory produced products like airplanes, cars, and consumer electronics. And that's something that, if you talk to people in a lot of these countries, these nuclear newcomer countries that are interested in starting commercial nuclear programs, they still really respect the reputation of the US and they would love to partner with the US on nuclear. But right now, Russia, China, South Korea are offering them much better packages for big construction projects, and they have more faith that those countries can pull off a big construction project. But if the US is able to demonstrate much smaller modular nuclear technologies, I think those will be a really valuable export product. But there needs to be some policy developments in parallel to make that process go smooth. If you're going to be exporting a lot of small nuclear, that's a very different paradigm than how we've done, safety, security, non-proliferation in the past. There could be some benefits, but it's a big question of how to make that work right, how to do it right.
Yeah, thank you. Judi, I have a question sort of among the policies. When you look around in the landscape for the US, you're looking for something that can drive finance, but also work to basically ensure that the low carbon technologies that are available become more and more competitive. It seems like the clean energy standard, and those of us who have written about that over the years, sort of fits really nicely in that paradigm, in part because, I know there are big trade-offs, and on Capitol Hill, that is not an easy issue and won't be an easy issue to get done. But when you look at this in terms of comparison to a cap and trade bill that we had on the Hill 10 years ago, or a carbon tax, it seems like it is a policy that is at least doable. How would that work? And I don't want to provide an overly positive scene setter for that. Would it really help advanced nuclear technologies? And do you think it works as at that intersection of political realism as well as driving technology?
Yeah, so we are broadly supportive of pretty much any policy that can make substantial progress on the climate problem. Clean energy standards are particularly interesting for a few reasons. One is that they draw on the experience we've had at the state level with renewable portfolio standards, which is a narrower example, but more and more states are now expanding and looking at clean energy standards, which is a broader version of that. So we actually have experience from the states, which are laboratories of democracy, where we actually have successful examples of this type of approach. There's also substantial interest in Congress and by the administration in clean electricity standard as a mechanism, so that's intriguing. And what a clean electricity standard would do is it would basically require electric utilities to meet a clean electricity requirement, but it would give those utilities the option to pick whatever set of technologies work for that utility, for that region, for that time in the future when we're working towards going down to zero emissions. So it's a technology neutral approach to getting to where we need to go. So it wouldn't for sure mean that advanced nuclear would be the big winner, but it would allow advanced nuclear to compete with other zero carbon options and would pull advanced nuclear as well as other zero carbon options into the marketplace and help us solve the climate problem.
Well, thanks for that. Ken, I have a question for you. It's being posed by someone who's watching this is asking about some articles that have been written recently, including in the Financial Times today, about China restricting export of rare earth elements. and in that case, the 4 U.S. defense objectives. And the question is, how does this sort of action give you pause when you start thinking about nuclear leadership, government influence? And I might add, the concern about our access to rare earth minerals is something, and elements is something we hear a lot about on Capitol Hill, but it's hard to get traction, perhaps, for Congress to really turn its attention to. So could you talk a little bit about that, about the concern of actually having access to these materials?
Yeah, this is another dimension of the U.S.-China innovation and technology competition, which is ultimately going to be one of the defining features of the next decade plus. Those rare earth materials are, a Financial Times story today focused on DoD and weapon systems, but they're also essential for electric vehicles and for other, use in other renewable technologies. So I think what COVID proved to everyone is that having supply chains that can be choked off is not a good idea. And I think that the United States would be well served, and I think they are, both from the previous administration and into this one, looking at how you can diversify the supply of rare earths because they're essential for these high technology systems. So, one of the themes that runs through this report, and I think that's going to run through a lot of how this process develops, is the US-China technology competition. And basically that's what Biden was talking about after his discussion with Xi. And there's lots of technologies we're talking about, one of them here with advanced nuclear. But to the point that was made earlier, in developing economy countries, you will lose influence. You've got a 100-year plus relationship on big reactors, on smaller reactors. It's not clear how long that relationship would be. Maybe it's somewhat less than that. But still, when you're cooperating with a nation on the provision of their electricity to run their economy, to service their population, to support their nation, that's not an insignificant thing. I think we've seen examples of, internationally and domestically, what happens when the grid fails. And so that it's a big issue, and cooperating with those countries is a major challenge that the United States has to take on diplomatically. I think they've been thinking about it and trying to do it, but I think we really need to ramp that up aggressively. And the supply line issue is no question has to be near the top of the agenda.
Great, Ken. Anyone else want to take a shot at that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this is one of the areas where we think there's opportunity for nuclear to get more integrated into the broader clean energy sort of community and discussion, because critical minerals like rare earths are really important for renewables and also batteries, electric vehicles. And it's something where, we've seen this push recently with the Nuclear Fuels Working Group, a push for more domestic mining for uranium. But there's also this focus in the Biden administration on environmental justice. We're going to have a lot of questions around leasing on federal lands for mining. So I think there's room there for nuclear to work with renewables advocates to figure out what sustainable mining looks like for a lot of these critical resources, and also how to stimulate it domestically, make sure we don't have those supply chain choke points, but in a way that's really equitable and just. And I think that's kind of a challenge opportunity that we're seeing maybe in the next few years.
One last question I'd like to pose to you all, and I guess I would probably throw this out to Niko first, and then maybe if Judi would like to answer also. Just a short question about grid reliability. This seems like an issue that, the Trump administration talked about that, but its ideas about grid reliability may not have, been necessarily greeted because they tended to involve fossil fuels. But I think it did raise an interesting question, which is, are we well prepared on the issue of grid reliability with the energy mix we have? Could Niko first, and then Judi, could you talk just shortly about, why this technology and why we need to ensure grid reliability and why that matters?
Yeah, definitely a very important topic. And I think where these new technologies are going to be important is first of all, we're going to need all sorts of different clean energy technologies for different locations. So some areas of the country will be more suited for wind or solar, some will be more suited for nuclear. So there's going to be a lot of different energy resources that are necessary. And I think that is the most important thing. And then kind of that next step with these new technologies is they are trying to build in a lot more of that flexible operation. So being able to use them for process heat, thermal energy storage, which can provide kind of that long duration energy storage. One of the advanced reactor companies that was selected by the Department of Energy is currently looking at this. So I think that's really where these designs are going to have that flexibility, is how can they be used differently by the grid to ensure not just reliable electricity, but also clean electricity.
Judi, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that, we have to do both. We have to both look at these individual technologies and help them advance their performance in partnership with industry and make sure that we actually have technologies that work. But we also have to constantly remember that it's part of this system. And the electricity system in particular is a very important system and basically is a machine itself in a way. And having all of the components work well, but also interact well, and making sure that we have system resources, which involves things like energy storage. It also involves having a diversity of different types of supply options, which gives you more resilience. But it's really, making sure that we both keep looking and working on the individual components of the system, but also never forget how important it is that the system as a whole work, because it's so important to keep the lights on and it's so important to decarbonize. And we just absolutely have to make sure that we're keeping our eyes on, I'm afraid, multiple balls at the same time.
Thank you, Judi. I just like to remind everyone, if you have further questions, you'd like to get a hold of some of these folks through Ben, you can email Ben at ben@renewpr.com if he can put you in charge of put you in touch with folks, or make sure that you can get the report, make sure you can see it. And I just wanted to thank everybody for participating. We had a great turnout today and some pretty impressive people on this panel. I really enjoy the subject. I'd like to thank Judi and Ken and Niko, Jessica and Jennifer, and everybody over at Ben's shop for putting this together. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.